Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was harem seal master of massive harem groups, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. As always, we have several clients requesting the services of Team 7, so you have free choice to pick which mission you want. Sarutobi began as Team 7 came to pick up another mission after a month of high demand for the apparently most popular genin team in Konoha. Today you've been requested to help the waitresses of a nightclub move some furniture. There is also a request to help a woman move to a new apartment. The final option is helping the Hokage-sama. Please just give us a C rank mission already. Sakura asked in a slightly crazed manner. The past month had been a long string of getting dumped with all the work while Naruto drove her insane by sleeping with every single client. And she had enough of it. Surely if they got a C rank mission and were sent out of the village he couldn't keep giving their team a reputation as a group of whores. She hadn't missed the way that some people had been looking at them, especially after a mission, since Naruto never bothered being quiet. She had never been so embarrassed in her life to walk next to another person. Every single day since the Torah mission there had been special requests for the services of Team 7, which was just another way of saying that Naruto was going to have loud with another woman, while the rest of them had to stick around until he finished. The worst times were when there were other people there with them. She and Sasuke could do nothing but wait with their heads hung in embarrassment while he made their team look like an escort service. Kakashi was not being helpful at all when he told them that Naruto was just being diligent at completing the missions, giggling perversely the whole time. I agree, we're ready for AC rank. Sasuke agreed quickly. He was handling the situation somewhat better than Sakura, but he was still eager to do something else than waiting for Naruto to finish the mission. Now listen here, you can't just demand a C rank mission from the Hokage. You've only been out of the academy for a month. Iruka ranted at them. Well, I think they're ready. Kakashi drawled lazily, bringing the Chunin up short. Honestly, the team wasn't getting any kind of teamwork done, except for the joint embarrassment and irritation of Sasuke and Sakura. AC rank sounds fun. Naruto grinned in approval, he was itching for some action himself. Sarutobi looked speculative for a moment, before he made his decision. Very well, send in Tazuna. Soon afterwards, an old man with a rope tied around his forehead entered. He was quite clearly drunk and getting drunker, judging by the sake bottle in his hand. So this is the team that's supposed to protect me. A Cyclops, an exhibitionist and 2 brats. Tazuna asked drunkenly, not overly impressed with the team that was supposed to be protecting him, even if the blonde did look pretty tough. My team is quite capable, I assure you, and if we run into anything that they can't handle, then I will take care of it. Kakashi assured. Team 7, your mission is to escort Tazuna, the bridge builder, back to his home in Wave Country and protect him until the bridge he is building is complete. Sarutobi explained the mission. Meet up at the gate in 2 hours, bring enough supplies to last several weeks. The Junin said to his team. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Several hours later, Team 7 and their client were walking through the forests of Fire Country, making their way slowly south towards Wave Country. Naruto had released his resistance seals and was feeling pretty annoyed at moving so slowly. Without the seals slowing him down, he felt as if he could take off and fly if he stepped on the ground too hard. It had been a long time since he'd released them last, and the way the seals were set up meant that they automatically increased the resistance on his body, keeping it constant with his strength increase. Well, he was pretty much at his physical peak, but the more he worked on it, the better he could reinforce his body with chakra. All of this meant that he was feeling irritable at the slow pace, but he wasn't going to keep the seals active on a mission that was potentially dangerous. He had no intention of dying because some stupid punk got lucky and attacked him before he could release the seals. At least the walk was helping him get used to his new speed and strength after being under the seals for so long. It usually didn't take long to get used to it, but it was always good to be fully used to your own body before a fight. Hey Naruto. Sasuke suddenly spoke up, much to the surprise of everyone except Tazuna, who didn't know how strange this was. What? I've been wondering, why do you never use any ninjutsu during our spars? Sasuke had been forced to reevaluate his opinion on the blonde several times during the month that they had been a team. At first, he'd refused to call Naruto by his name, instead calling him dead last, but that had ended when the blonde had kicked him in the face for it. This had led to Sakura yelling at him, and getting kicked in the face for it. Kakashi had them spar regularly, and Sasuke was frustrated to note that Naruto was not moving anywhere near as fast, nor hitting as hard as he had during the bell test, meaning that he was clearly holding back. Everyone looked towards the blonde, interested in hearing his answer. That's because I can't, he told them blandly. Everyone looked at him in shock, well except Tazuna, who didn't know what the big deal was. What do you mean you can't use ninjutsu? Kakashi asked, wondering if it was the same problem that Guy's student had. I have too much chakra to use normal ninjutsu. How can you have too much chakra to use ninjutsu? That doesn't make any sense. Sakura protested. I have so much chakra that it's actually become so condensed in my coils, that I overload any ninjutsu or genjutsu that I try to use. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I have at least 10 times the amount of chakra that the Hokage has. The only ninjutsu that I can use are the ones that don't require hand seals or use up huge amounts of chakra, meaning raw shape and nature manipulation. Naruto explained, leaving out the fact that he could use the transformation technique just fine. It just used up nearly 300 times the chakra, making the chakra coating around him so dense that it actually caused a physical transformation. I didn't think you even knew any ninjutsu aside from the ones they teach at the academy. Sakura commented. There is a library section open for genin, you know. Where do you think the diet and exercise plans that Kakashi gave you came from? Naruto deepanned at her. There's a library with ninjutsu available for any genin that goes in there. Sasuke was shocked. There was free ninjutsu up for grabs and he didn't know about it. Don't wet your panties with excitement, princess. There isn't anything too powerful in there since it's meant for genin, though there might be more for you than for me in there considering you're fire-natured and we're in fire country. Naruto shot down Sasuke's delusion of just grabbing up powerful ninjutsu from the library. Sakura scowled at the blonde, annoyed at the way he kept insulting her Sasuke-kun, but didn't say anything for fear of getting another boot to the face. She settled for asking another question instead. What kind of chakra nature do you have, Naruto, and how do you find out your chakra nature anyway? I've got wind and water natures, which is just my luck since those are the rarest natures in Konoha, and you need a special chakra paper to test your affinity. Naruto explained. Why do you have two natures and Sasuke-kun only has one? Sakura questioned further, feeling that it was unfair if her crush only had one chakra nature. Sasuke was wondering the same thing. Kakashi interjected his own opinion at this point. He might have more than one for all we know, since he hasn't been tested yet. This settled Sasuke's rising jealousy, but he was still wondering about something. So, if you can't use normal ninjutsu, what can you do with your nature manipulation? At the moment, splash water around harmlessly and create a nice breeze, since I haven't been able to find any information on nature manipulation training yet. The blonde stated flatly, still irritated that he hadn't managed to make any use of his affinities. That's because it's a Junin level skill, Naruto, there's no need to be in such a rush. Kakashi said with an eye smile, making Sasuke and Sakura look at him in surprise. Some of us aren't lazy assholes like you, Kakashi. I've already lost 4 years thanks to the morons in the academy holding me back, and I have no intention of waiting until I make Junin to learn that. Naruto replied with a scowl. What do you mean, holding you back? Weren't you the dead last 4 years running? Sakura asked in confusion. Naruto restrained the urge to kick her in the face, since she hadn't meant it as an insult for a change. I'm pretty sure that the instructors were screwing up my scores so that they'd have an excuse to fail me at the end of the year. That's why I only bothered to show up for tests. I've actually been sending shadow clones to the academy for the past 2 years instead of going myself. Everyone was surprised to hear this, Sasuke and Sakura especially. Wait, you mean you're only 4 years older than these two brats? Tazuna interrupted in shock, having thought that the blonde was a good deal older than that. It wasn't an unreasonable assumption, considering the fact that Naruto was already very tall and he didn't look like a teenager at all. The constant workout that the resistance seals gave him had completely burned off all the baby fat that he should have retained at the age of 17, leaving him looking like he was made out of marble. Without that distinct softness that youth would give to the face of a teenager, his features were defined sharply, giving him a predatory look that was enhanced tenfold by his sharp teeth and feral whisker marks. He was far from unattractive, as the dangerous look often excited women, but he was definitely not attractive in a traditional manner. They all gave Tazuna a nod, before Sasuke picked up on something that he'd missed earlier in the conversation. But if you have too much chakra for regular ninjutsu, then why can you make shadow clones? Because there's nothing regular about shadow clones, Sasuke. It's a B-ranked kinjutsu that only a few Junin ever learn because of its high chakra cost. If anyone other than Naruto tried to use shadow clones the way that he does, they would run out of chakra almost instantly. Kakashi explained lazily, eyes firmly glued to his book. Sasuke scowled at that, annoyed at the fact that the blonde had such a powerful jutsu and wondering how he even got it in the first place. While he wouldn't want to be in Naruto's position of being unable to use ninjutsu, he couldn't deny that having that kind of insane chakra capacity would be great to have when he finally faced Itachi. The group continued on in silence for a while before Sakura broke it by asking Tazuna whether Wave Country had any ninja of its own, which led to Kakashi explaining that 5 great nations and their hidden villages, after which the group lapsed into silence once again. Not long after that, they were approaching a puddle in the middle of the dirt road. Kakashi quickly noticed that there was no reason for a puddle to be there, as it hadn't rained in nearly 2 weeks. Naruto, however, noticed the low levels of killing intent that were originating from the puddle, after which he quickly noticed that the ground was much too dry for there to be a puddle there. Exchanging a glance with Kakashi, the Junin nodded at him, surprised that the blonde had noticed it, but pleased nonetheless. The group meandered past the puddle, Kakashi with his face buried in his book, Naruto with his hands in the pockets of his coat, looking bored, Sakura glancing at Sasuke every few moments and Sasuke doing his best to ignore her. As they passed the puddle, 2 shinobi with scratched-out Kurigakure forehead protectors, each one carrying a gauntlet that was connected to the other with a chain, rose from the puddle and wrapped the chain around Kakashi, who was walking at the back of the group. With a violent pull, a wide-eyed, shocked-looking Kakashi was torn into pieces, shocking everyone except Naruto, who didn't even bother to take his hands out of his pockets. 1 down. One of the 2 shinobi began. And 3 to go. The other finished. Sakura remained frozen with fear next to the equally frozen Tazuna, pulling out a kunai out of pure reflex rather than any confidence about defending herself with it. Sasuke snapped out of his shock quickly, charging at the shinobi on the left, evading his slow attack and bringing his leg around in a powerful blow to the back of the head, knocking him out. Turning around with a smug look, he looked towards Naruto, expecting him to still be having some trouble with the other one, only to see that the blonde still hadn't bothered to take his hands out of his pockets, simply planting his boot right into the mon's face hard enough to break his nose, drive the bones into his brain and killing him instantly, making the poison-tipped claw useless, still looking bored. To him, the 2 shinobi had been slower than dripping honey in winter, that combined with foreknowledge of the attack, made the whole thing rather underwhelming. Sasuke grinded his teeth at being shown up so badly. He was supposed to be an elite, an Uchiha. Was he so much weaker than his brother that he couldn't even best a no-name orphan like Naruto? Well done all of you. Sasuke and Naruto neutralized the threat while Sakura protected the client. Kakashi praised as he suddenly appeared in front of them. Kakashi-sensei, you're alive, Sakura exclaimed in happy surprise. Of course, they only cut apart a log after all. The Junin replied with an eye smile, making Sakura look at the scene of his death, only to notice that indeed, there was a log in 3 pieces there. She smiled sheepishly at forgetting about the substitution technique. If she was honest with herself, she was feeling both shaken and somewhat ashamed of herself. Even though Kakashi had praised her for protecting the client, she had just been too terrified to move. The whole incident only served to bring Naruto's words from the bell test crashing back into her mind. If she had encountered this kind of situation alone, or if Kakashi really had been killed and her teammates weren't strong enough to fight them off alone, then she would have been completely useless, just like Naruto had said. Even though she had asked Kakashi about getting into shape and he had given her diet and exercise plans, she hadn't been too enthusiastic about doing them. Sure, she'd used them, but not to the extent that she could have. She was sure that she was still behind what most of her academy classmates had been capable of when they graduated, never mind her 2 teammates, who were clearly much further along than that. Those were the demon brothers, B-rank missing nin from Kurigakure. Is there something you aren't telling us, Tazuna-san? Kakashi asked pointedly, making the old man sweat. B-rank. I wouldn't give them anything above AC ranking. Naruto commented. Well, that performance just now definitely wasn't B rank, but they were probably underestimating you. Kakashi answered with a sweat drop, before turning to Tazuna, expecting an answer. Well, you see, there's a really dangerous man after me, his name is Gato. Tazuna explained nervously. Gato. Of the Gato Shipping Company. Said to be the richest man in the world. Kakashi asked in surprise, not having expected such a thing. Yeah, but his shipping company is also a front for his smuggling and drug dealing operation. Over a year ago, he moved into Wave and started buying up every business that had so much as a fishing boat. If someone didn't want to sell, then he sent his hired thugs to get rid of them. Since Wave is an island nation, this means that he effectively controls the entire country. That's fine and all, but why did you say this was a C-rank mission if you knew that he would send shinobi after you? As it is, this mission is now at least B rank if not A rank. We would be fully within our rights to abandon the mission, since you lied about it. Kakashi questioned sternly. Because Wave is too poor now to afford anything more than AC rank, even the daimyo doesn't have any money. We aren't even sure if he's still alive since Gato took over his mansion. But if you want to quit now, I'll understand. It's no big deal that I'll be killed and that my daughter will hate Konoha Ninja forever and my cute little grandson will cry all the time. Tazuna both explained and spun what he hoped was a sob enough story to make them feel bad if they wanted to quit the mission. Kakashi just sighed as he had a feeling what his hot-headed students would want to do. Sakura would likely be relieved about going back to Konoha, but Sasuke and Naruto would both be excited rather than scared off at the prospect of the mission being tougher than it was supposed to be. I say we continue the mission. Naruto said simply. I agree. Sasuke seconded. Seeing that her crush wanted to continue, Sakura just nodded her head in agreement. Both Sasuke and Sakura were privately hoping that Naruto didn't end up sleeping with the aforementioned daughter. Tazuna looked at them in gratitude and relief, before looking over at the Junin of the group, knowing that it was ultimately his decision. Kakashi withheld another sigh, feeling that this was a really bad idea, since the next opponent was likely going to be a Junin, but the team was finally working together on something and he didn't want to ruin that. Alright, I guess we're continuing the mission. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Alright Tazuna, this is as far as I go. The boatman that had ferried them across the ocean to the island nation of Wave said. Thanks Kaji. Tazuna replied. They were now in Wave country and still there had been no further attacks, making Kakashi suspect that it would happen very soon now. It was after all, best to attack someone while they were in unfamiliar territory. Naruto was paying attention to the surroundings carefully, also thinking that things were a bit too easy. Most of his attention, however, was on sensing any killing intent at all. His youth had made him highly sensitive to it, as he had been the target of it a lot of the time. Though the killing intent of civilians was quite pathetic, it had proven useful to attuning him to sensing such things. The suppressed killing intent of a ninja wasn't that much different from that of a civilian. That's when he sensed it, a very faint killing intent coming from the bushes. Without thinking, he flung one of his rarely used kunai into the bush and the killing intent instantly vanished, making Naruto narrow his eyes in suspicion. A cute, but terrified squeaking sound revealed that he had nearly sunk the kunai into the head of a white snow rabbit. He ignored Sakura's chastisement about frightening the poor animal, because he was utterly certain that it hadn't been a rabbit that was thinking about killing them. That rabbit shouldn't have a white coat at this time of year, meaning that it's been raised indoors. Kakashi realized, before suddenly yelling out to his team, "Get down!" Sasuke instantly obeyed. Naruto kicked Sakura's legs out from under her and flung himself to the ground simultaneously, and Kakashi tackled the bridge builder. It was all done just in time as well, as a giant sword spun through the air where they had been standing just moments before. The sword planted itself into a tree, and a tall, shirtless man with a leather strap over his chest appeared on the long hilt of the sword. He was wearing camouflage pattern arm and leg warmers. His scratched-out Kurigakure forehead protector identified him as a missing nin, and he was distinctly lacking eyebrows for some odd reason, and he also had the lower half of his face wrapped in bandages, creating a similar effect as Kakashi's mask. Momochi Zabuza, the demon of the hidden mist. Kakashi stated, identifying the newcomer. Sharingan Kakashi, the copy ninja. Zabuza replied, surprising Sasuke, who was wondering why his sensei was called that. Stay back and protect Tazuna, this enemy is out of your league. Kakashi said, while lifting his headband and revealing his implanted Sharingan. Oh, I get to see the Sharingan already. I'm honored. You know, you could just hand over the bridge builder and we'd have no problem. Zabuza commented idly, readying his weapon. Sorry, but we have a mission to protect him. Kakashi returned. I thought you'd say that. Immediately after saying that, Zabuza jumped over to the nearby lake and made a hand sign. Kurigakure no Jutsu, hiding in mist technique. A dense cover of mist formed rapidly, obscuring sight and making Kakashi a good deal more wary, as his Sharingan was useless if he couldn't see. Don't lower your guard, Zabuza is a master of the silent killing technique. The Junin warned. Silent killing? Sakura asked nervously. As the name suggests, users of the technique are able to kill their targets without a sound. Most of the time, the target dies without ever realizing it. Kakashi explained, warily looking around for a glimpse of the missing nin. Naruto was trying to pinpoint Zabuza's position by the feel of the Mon's killing intent, but wasn't having any luck, as it seemed to be coming from several places and he could only get a general location either way. He ignored Zabuza's little speech about the 8 points in the body that he could strike for a lethal blow, as he knew that the man was just doing it to freak them out. Kakashi then used a chakra burst to disperse the mist, making Naruto wonder why he hadn't done that before. The rising pressure of the killing intent being tossed around by the two Junin was considerable, and Naruto could see that it was getting to Sasuke, as the Uchiha survivor looked about ready to kill himself. The only reason that Sakura wasn't in the same position was because she wasn't attuned enough to feel it. Sasuke, calm down. I won't let my comrades die, I'll protect all of you. Kakashi spoke, breaking Sasuke out of his panic attack. Immediately after that, Naruto sensed the presence appearing in the middle of their formation. He spun around with an outstretched kunai, stabbing it into Zabuza's forehead, only for the man to turn into water. Looks like you got a fast one there. Zabuza commented, not letting on that the fast reaction from the blonde had ruined his plan to get rid of Kakashi. The big, muscle-bound blonde had confused him at first. The other two looked like fresh genin, but this one was clearly a good bit older than them, and he didn't look incompetent enough to be one of those genin lifers. When Kakashi had given all three of them orders to stay out of the fight, it had told him that he didn't think any of them could be of any help in the fight, but that speedy disposal of his clone just now told a different story. If he didn't want this turning against him, he needed to keep the blonde from joining the fight. Even if he wasn't as strong as Kakashi, he could still be dangerous enough to turn the tables decidedly against him. Kakashi had pinpointed the location of the voice when Zabuza had spoken this time and immediately rushed at it, ramming his kunai into the surprised-looking mont's abdomen. Only for the man to turn into water and another Zabuza to appear behind him, already swinging the sword to cut him in half. Having no time to dodge, Kakashi was cut in half and then immediately turned to water. Zabuza felt a kunai on his neck from another Kakashi immediately after. "It's over, Zabuza," Kakashi stated confidently. "Yes, it is." The humor in Zabuza's tone tipped Kakashi off to the fact that something was wrong, making him duck hastily, stabbing the Zabuza in front of him just in case it was another trick, but the water that leaked out of the wound and the sword's whizzing over his head proved the ducking to be a wise move. Zabuza proved to have great mastery of his oversized sword though, as the mist swing sank it into the ground, but instead of trying to pull it out, he used the sword as extra leverage to kick the silver-haired Junin into the lake. Kakashi was finding it extremely difficult to get out of the water, as it was unusually heavy. He had just processed the fact that being in the water while fighting a water-specialized shinobi was a bad idea when he was suddenly encased in a sphere of water. Sweden. Suiro no Jutsu, water release, water prison technique. It might be a prison of water, but it's stronger than steel. You won't be escaping from here anytime soon, and now all I have to do is get rid of that blonde and those two brats of yours. Sasuke gritted his teeth at being dismissed so easily, while Naruto just observed carefully to see if there were any weaknesses that he could exploit in this situation. That water prison technique looked interesting, but from what he could see, Zabuza had to keep his hand stuck inside it to sustain it, and that was a serious weakness. Take the bridge builder and run. This fight was over when he captured me. Kakashi urged them. He can't move as long as he's holding this prison, so just run. I'm not sure what you're thinking right now, Kakashi, but I'm the only one fast enough to outrun no brows here, and I can't do that while carrying someone. Not to mention that he could just come after us after he kills you. Naruto replied dryly, making Kakashi feel a little stupid that he hadn't considered that. You're not sounding very scared, Blondie, despite knowing who I am. Zabuza said, making a few water clones. Before he replied, Naruto using his full speed to smash into the water clones, who couldn't react fast enough, as they had only 1/10% of the original's power. That's because you've placed yourself into a bad position by using a technique that prevents you from moving. Naruto told him idly, making Zabuza worry that the blonde was indeed more dangerous than Kakashi's attitude would indicate. You're different than the other two, you've got dangerous eyes. What's your name? Zabuza asked, realizing that this one bore watching. Uzumaki Naruto. The blonde replied with a grin that showed him teeth just as sharp as his. Zabuza wanted to curse. Any ninja worth his salt knew about the Uzumaki. Even if they had been destroyed before his time, they had been feared with good reason after all. A small island nation like Uzushio had been able to stand on equal footing with the 5 great nations because of the Uzumaki. Kumogakure and Kurigakure, along with several minor groups, had allied together for the sole purpose of destroying Uzushiogakure and had still suffered horrendous losses despite outnumbering the Uzumaki more than 10-1. He could only hope that this one didn't know any of the crazy techniques that the clan had been known for. Sasuke, Sakura. Naruto spoke suddenly to his teammates, getting their attention. Feel free to throw kunai and shuriken at Zabuza. What are you going to be doing? Sasuke asked, readying some shuriken. He didn't like taking orders from the blonde, but he seemed to have some idea about what to do. Rather than answer, Naruto used a technique that made everyone's jaws drop. Uzumaki Haijutsu. Kusari Uzumaki's secret art, chains. 4 chains extended out of Naruto's back, going through his coat, but not damaging it, their sharpened tips pointed at Zabuza like the legs of a spider. He was glad that he'd put seals all over the coat and pants to make sure they didn't get damaged. They were especially immune to his own chakra, seeing as the seals on it were saturated with it. Shit. Fucking Uzumaki. Zabuza swore. This was looking really bad for him. If he moved, then Kakashi would be freed, and if he didn't move, then he'd eventually get skewered by either the chains or the thrown weapons from the two brats. He couldn't even do a damn thing about it, because they were all safely out of range of his sword. If it was just thrown weapons, it wouldn't be a problem, but those chains could keep harassing him from multiple directions and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. Your cursing seems to indicate that the Uzumaki were a clan of some sort. Naruto said in interest. He had long ago managed to sniff out the name of a red-headed kunoichi by the name of Uzumaki Kushina, who had no doubt been his mother, but it seemed that someone in the village had purged all information about the Uzumaki. He had long suspected that it had been or was a clan, but this pretty much confirmed it. You didn't know. The Uzumaki were a clan, all right. They got destroyed by an alliance between Kumogakure and Kurigakure during the Second Shinobi World War, because there were a lot of people scared of them. Zabuza answered, stalling for time a bit so that he could have some more time to think of a way out of this. Thank you, I've been wondering about that for years. Naruto replied, making Kakashi wonder just how much his blonde student actually knew. Unnoticed by everyone, Sasuke was grinding his teeth together at learning yet another thing about Naruto that made the blonde better than him. He couldn't have taken out those clones. Those chains looked to be incredibly powerful, and now he learned that the Uzumaki were an actual clan that was so feared and powerful that it had taken an alliance of two great hidden villages to destroy, while his own was destroyed by a single traitor. Without any further delay, Naruto sent forth his chains and his teammates began throwing weapons at the motionless form of Zabuza. The swordsman managed to deflect the initial attack and dodge the next one by twisting his body. The chains, however, were a lot more maneuverable than him and had wrapped themselves around his weapon and began pulling it out of his hands. This forced Zabuza to let go of the water prison so that he could bring his full strength to bear against the chains. This, however, freed Kakashi, who immediately attacked, forcing Zabuza to abandon the tug of war over his sword or get stabbed. Good work on getting me out of there, I'll handle it from here. Kakashi said, positioning himself across from Zabuza. Zabuza found himself outmatched in the following ninjutsu battle, the Sharingan proving to be too great an advantage, as it allowed Kakashi to perfectly predict his intentions and even hypnotize him into making a mistake at the end. Zabuza crashed into a tree after being hit by a powerful torrent of water from Kakashi's great waterfall technique, dazed and injured. Just as the Sharingan-wielding Junin was about to finish him off though, two needles sank into the missing nin's neck, apparently killing him instantly. Thank you for your help, I have been waiting for an opportunity to take down Zabuza for some time, said the newly arrived ninja, dressed like a member of the Kiri Hunter Nin. He or she had long black hair and was wearing the blank white mask with a strange hooked swirl over the bottom part of it, the Kurigakure symbol etched into the forehead, and dressed in the faded green combat kimono of the Kurigakure Hunter Nin Corps. No problem, Hunter-san, said Kakashi, hiding just how tired he was. He quickly checked Zabuza for a pulse, just to be extra certain, and when he found none, he stepped away from the body. While Kakashi and Zabuza had been having their ninjutsu battle, Naruto had dragged the sword to himself with his chains, and was now holding it over his shoulder in his right hand. I would ask that you give me that sword, Uzumaki-san, it is property of Kurigakure after all. You want this sword? It's yours, if you get down on your knees and lick my bitch. Naruto replied heatedly with a finger pointed at the masked ninja, having taken a liking to the sword. He even felt like being a bit ostentatious, so he used his rudimentary control over wind chakra to create a breeze that made his coat and ponytail flap in the wind dramatically. Haku was taken aback, having not expected that kind of over-the-top response in the slightest, and at the fact that the blonde had apparently guessed her gender. She was also extremely grateful that the mask hid her blushing and slack-jawed expression at the incredibly crude proposition. Naruto, Kakashi, Sasuke and Sakura groaned in unison, while Tazuna was looking like he was trying not to laugh despite still being somewhat scared. Hell no, I'm not giving up this sword to some hunter nin. If the Mizukage wants it back, he'll have to send for it personally. Naruto insisted stubbornly. Haku was torn with indecision at this, as that would be a perfectly reasonable request if she had actually been a hunter nin. Either way, the longer she stayed here, the more likely it was that someone would figure out that something fishy was going on. She knew that Zabuza would be incredibly angry over losing the sword, but at least he would be alive. Alright, I will inform the Mizukage of this, said the masked ninja and vanished with Zabuza's body. Kakashi looked over at his team with an eye smile. Great work, team. He was about to speak further, intending to question Naruto about those chains, but he face-planted into the ground and felt all the strength leave his body. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura exclaimed, worried that he'd been hurt. I'm fine, Sakura, it's just chakra exhaustion. Kakashi explained and passed out immediately afterwards. I guess you guys are carrying him the rest of the way to Tazuna's house. Naruto stated lightly. What? Why us? You're the biggest and strongest out of the three of us. Sakura complained, with Sasuke nodding in agreement. Naruto favored her with a terrifying fanged grin that told everyone who saw it that they were meat and he was hungry. Because I've got a big sword and I'm not afraid to use it. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Kakashi woke up and felt weak as a kitten. Chakra exhaustion, that's just great. He tried to get up, all the while commenting to himself. I guess I really overdid it with my Sharingan, I can barely move. Then maybe you shouldn't be moving at all, said a pretty dark-haired woman in her late 20s, who had just entered the room and heard him talking to himself. She was wearing a pink short-sleeved shirt with red trim around the sleeves and neckline. Sensei, you're awake, Sakura exclaimed, as she along with Sasuke, Naruto and Tazuna made their way into the room. Yeah, I'm awake, but I'm not going to be able to move normally for a week, my Sharingan really takes a lot out of me. Is it really worth using if it puts that kind of strain on you? Sakura asked worriedly. Well, it's okay now that you took care of that assassin, right? Tazuna asked. Yeah, about that, there's something strange about that, Kakashi said as something kept niggling in his mind. What? Sakura asked in confusion. Well, Hunter Nin are supposed to destroy the body immediately to prevent enemy shinobi from capturing it and prying village secrets out of it, not take it away. Also, the hunter used Senbon needles, which are rarely fatal. The Junin explained. What are you getting at? Tazuna asked worriedly. I'm saying that Zabuza is still alive, he stated, surprising everyone. But you checked his pulse, didn't you? Sakura asked fearfully. She'd been terrified the entire battle. Yes, and he didn't have one, but a skilled hunter nin would have no difficulty placing someone in a death trance. Kakashi refuted. Aren't you overthinking things here? I mean, you completely destroyed that guy. Tazuna tried to reason. Shinobi must never disregard anything suspicious, as that might be the last mistake they ever make. The Cyclopean Junin answered firmly. But now what are we going to do? I mean, you barely beat him and now you won't be able to move normally for a week. Sakura worried. Well, Zabuza is going to be having movement problems of his own for a week because of that death trance. And I've got his sword. Naruto added. Yes, there is that. We were fortunate that Naruto is such a rude bastard and refused to give the sword to that fake hunter nin, since Zabuza will now be missing his most powerful weapon. Kakashi confirmed with an eye smile. What do you mean his most powerful weapon? Sasuke asked, speaking up for the first time. Before he went rogue, Zabuza was one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the Mist, an elite group of shinobi, each one carrying a powerful sword, and each sword is rumored to have a secret special ability. Sweet, Naruto said with a grin, while Sasuke frowned over the fact that the blonde seemed to have acquired a powerful weapon with unknown abilities. The sword was way too big for him, but he wanted something like it. And I'll be training you in the week before Zabuza gets back on his feet. How is a week of training supposed to help us against someone like Zabuza? Sakura shrieked with much less volume than she used to. Well, it was you three that helped me beat him, didn't you? Kakashi asked rhetorically, making a mental note to have that conversation with Naruto soon. If he shows himself again, we'll just kick his again. Naruto said with an excited grin. He was rather excited at the prospect of fighting Zabuza again. No, you won't, you're all just going to get yourself killed. A young voice suddenly piped up. Naruto turned around to look at the little kid that had entered the room, flashing his bare chest at Tsunami in the process, causing the woman to look away with a small blush. She had been trying not to look at the big blonde for the entire time that they'd been in the room together. And who are you? Naruto asked the mopey-looking kid that was wearing an oversized hat. Oh, this is my grandson Inari. Tazuna told them. Inari, these are the ninja that protected your grandfather, say hello to them. Tsunami told the boy. Why, they're all just going to die when Gato sends his men to kill them. Inari said sullenly. Inari, that's very rude. His mother chastised him. Gato already sent his strongest and failed, anyone else he sends is likely going to be nothing more than a hired thug, which might as well be sheep against a ninja. Naruto said dismissively. Whatever, you should all just go home before you get killed. Inari said as a parting shot before he left the room. Please forgive Inari, Tsunami tried to explain. He's lost hope, Naruto stated with certainty. Tsunami looked surprised at the fact that the blonde had figured it out so quickly. How did you know? She asked. I've seen it before. Those like him go around telling everyone how hopeless it is, because they hate the fact that they can't hope anymore and they don't like to see others who still can. Everyone looked at the blonde in surprise at that, wondering how he knew so much about this. Only Kakashi had a faint idea that Naruto's life definitely couldn't have been easy. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. The entire group, minus Inari, who had taken his food up to his room, were in the living room, enjoying Tsunami's cooking. It really was good food, but Naruto was well aware of the few anxious looks that Tsunami had leveled at the pantries and refrigerator when she'd seen how much they were eating. Clearly, she was worried about how feeding this many people was going to impact her ability to feed her family in the future. The occasional glance and blush that she sent towards him was also not missed, no matter how subtle she thought she was being. He wasn't sure if Sasuke and Sakura had missed them or if they were doing a very good job of pretending that it wasn't happening. It was so funny seeing those two get embarrassed over the fact that someone they knew was frequently active. He wasn't sure what genius had claimed that all shinobi were adults when they became genin, no matter their age. Did that mean that Kakashi had been an adult at the age of 6? Yeah, that sounded like a really smart move right there, giving a 6-year-old free access to alcohol, tobacco, porn, and let's not forget the brothels. He'd also noticed the picture of the family on the wall. The happy looks on the faces of Inari and Tsunami made it clear that the picture had been taken during better times. It didn't take a genius to guess that the man in the picture who had his face cut out of the picture was somehow connected how things had gotten so bad. Either the man had died and it hurt them to see his face, or done something terrible to warrant having his face removed from the picture. But now was not the time to be asking about that. There was a conversation with Kakashi that had been looming for the whole day. He thanked Tsunami for the dinner, causing the woman to blush again, before giving Kakashi a look and heading outside. Kakashi hobbled after him shortly afterwards and then simply stood next to him in the dark a short distance away from the house. Naruto was waiting for Kakashi to say something, but the Junin found himself unable to find any words despite the fact that he'd known this conversation was coming. My mother was Uzumaki Kushina, wasn't she? Naruto suddenly asked, snapping Kakashi out of his thoughts. How did you find out? You just told me, but I've suspected it for a long time. Kakashi scowled at the fact that a genin had used that old trick on him. There was only one other Uzumaki in the village aside from me in recent times, so I eventually dragged that out of someone with liberal use of the transformation technique, seeing as nobody wanted to talk about it to Uzumaki Naruto for some reason. Naruto continued. Kakashi winced at that. He hadn't agreed with the Sandaime about keeping the truth from Naruto for this long. When he'd been much younger, it had made sense, but Naruto had been ready to know the truth for years now. And clearly he had dug it out no matter how hard Sarutobi had tried to hide it. Do you know who your father is too? Kakashi asked. The Yondaime. That was actually even easier to figure out, seeing as my looks are rather distinctive and mom and dad hadn't been very discreet about their relationship. Naruto answered. Of course, the real reason that it had been easier to figure out was because Zana had flat out told him, but Kakashi didn't need to know that. Naruto, the Sandaime was just trying to protect you by keeping it hidden. Kakashi reasoned. Don't make excuses for the old man, Kakashi. The real reason he didn't tell me was because he just didn't want to deal with the hassle. Sarutobi doesn't like to rock the boat in his old age and keeps telling himself that it's the best thing to do. Naruto retorted. This was the main reason that Naruto didn't trust or want anything to do with the old man. The man was so afraid of doing anything that he just sat on information that he should have acted on and pretty much let the council run the village for him. He might claim to hate the paperwork, but he wasn't above using it as an excuse to not do anything. As far as Naruto was concerned, the village hadn't had a Hokage since the Yondaime died. Sarutobi may as well have been a random senior citizen dressed up in the robes and keeping the chair warm. I bet he even told you not to approach me until I ended up on your team. Naruto guessed. Kakashi just nodded grimly, confirming it. Sarutobi had indeed done that, claiming that it would draw too much attention to Naruto. Jiraiya was in a similar situation. The man was Naruto's godfather, so he had more right than anyone to take Naruto in and take care of him, but it was true that if Jiraiya had taken him in, that a lot of attention would be on him. Not to mention the fact that the man had a spy network to mind. That wasn't even taking into account the fact that he'd just lost someone who had been like a son to him for all intents and purposes. Sarutobi had promised Jiraiya that Naruto would be well taken care of and would be ready to become his apprentice after he became a shinobi, but clearly the first part of that promise had not worked out the way it was supposed to. Especially considering the fact the academy had screwed him over badly. If Naruto had been allowed to graduate when he had been supposed to, then Kakashi wasn't sure which one of them would be stronger right now. He strongly suspected that it wouldn't be him. Seeing that the secret was thoroughly blown, Kakashi told him some things about his parents that he hadn't known yet. The things that he hadn't known was surprisingly short, as apparently several years' worth of reminiscing, while transformed into random people, had allowed him to gather up a rather large amount of information. We should get some sleep, we've got training to do tomorrow. Kakashi said, as it was getting pretty late. Everyone else was already asleep. You go on ahead, I'm going to stay out here for a little longer. Naruto answered. XXXXXXXXXXX. Tsunami was sleeping in peacefully in her futon, alone as always. The team of Konoha shinobi were all sleeping in the same room. Her initial protest about a girl sharing a room with 3 males was waved off in 3 different ways. Sasuke grunted. Kakashi said that Sakura needed to get used to it anyway. Embarrassment around teammates was something that had to go as soon as possible. Naruto said he preferred older women, with a wink at Tsunami that was missed by everyone except her. This had happened before Naruto and Kakashi had gone out to have their talk, and it had embarrassed Tsunami all the way until she'd fallen asleep. Her eyes suddenly flew open in panic as a hand was pressed over her mouth to prevent her from screaming. Shish, it's just me, came a whisper in a familiar voice. Tsunami managed to calm down enough to take note of the fact that the man holding her down was very big, and she could feel the hard muscle of his chest pressing into her throat, her thin sleeping gown. Then she caught sight of deep blue eyes that almost seemed to glow in the darkness of her room. Naruto-san, what are you doing here? She hissed at him quietly, disbelieving that he had just broken into her room and woken her up in a way that had all but convinced her that she was about to get raped. No honorifics please, I hate those things. Naruto returned dryly. Fine, Naruto. Now what are you doing in my room in the middle of the night? She insisted, getting annoyed now, but at least her heart was slowing down. She absently noticed that he wasn't wearing his coat. I needed to talk to you in private and this seemed like the best time for it. Naruto explained. It seemed like the best time and place to have a private conversation was the middle of the night in my futon. She asked incredulously. Well, I wanted to talk to you as fast as possible and I didn't know when I'd get the chance. Tsunami huffed in irritation at the twisted logic, but figured that she may as well go along with it, since it appeared that the blonde wasn't intending to leave until he got what he'd came for. Fine, what did you want to talk about? Inari's attitude, it has something to do with that man whose face was removed from the picture, doesn't it? She looked up at him in shock that he'd managed to figure out that much already. Yes, Inari's real father died not long after he was born. Kaiza saved Inari from drowning and the two grew close quickly. Kaiza had come to Wave, chasing after his dreams. We married not long after he saved Inari and Kaiza quickly became a hero to Wave due to his bravery. Tsunami said softly, trying to hold back tears. Sounds like my kind of guy. What happened? Naruto asked. Kaiza always liked to say that if you valued something then you had to grab hold of it and protect it with both arms. She continued with her voice now choked with tears. He wasn't willing to just let Gato take over, so he fought against him. Then one day, they dragged him off to the market, broke his arms and executed him in public. After saying that, she collapsed into tears, grabbing onto him for comfort just because he was there. Naruto grimaced. He hadn't intended to make her relive painful memories and he had no idea what to do with a sobbing woman. He definitely couldn't just leave though, seeing as he'd been the one to put her in this condition, he'd feel lower than dirt if he just left. Not knowing what else to do, he just got more comfortable, held her closer and let her cry while rubbing her back. Despite his intrusion into her room, Tsunami was grateful that he was there now. She had never really had a chance to grieve for Kaiza, worried as she'd been over Inari's darkening mood. Then after that she'd been worried about her father and about their dwindling ability to get enough food, which Tazuna hadn't been making easier by buying sake all the time. This was the first time in nearly a year that she was able to just let go and let someone else take care of her. Trying to be strong all the time, holding back her own grief while doing her best to comfort Inari hadn't been easy. Especially as the boy had developed a completely fatalistic and despairing outlook, some days it was all she could do not to burst into tears. She hadn't really expected her father's bridge project to succeed and had been worried out of her mind when they'd heard that Gato would be sending people to kill him. That had been the reason that he had gone to Konoha to hire ninja in the first place, but Gato had simply hired his own. She had been bracing herself to hear that they had been ambushed and killed on the road, but instead they had come through, with her father being perfectly fine. He'd been very impressed with the strength of the shinobi that Konoha had assigned to protect him, especially Kakashi and Naruto. She'd found the blonde's strange dislike of shirts embarrassing, especially as she had always had a thing for big and muscular men, but she now had hope that there might just be a happy ending at the end of all this thanks to him. She knew that Kakashi was the team leader and supposedly the stronger of the two of them, but Naruto had a strange charisma about him that made you think he could and would beat a mountain into submission if it got in his way. When her tears subsided, Naruto made to move from under her and go back to his own room, but was stopped by a hand on his chest. Biting her lip nervously, her face still tear-streaked, Tsunami spoke up. Please stay with me, I don't want to be alone right now. He was surprised at her request, as he'd expected her to be upset at the fact that he'd pried into painful and personal things like that. All right, he replied softly after a moment and used his thumb to wipe away what was left of her tears. They moved around until she was spooned up against his chest and she thought that he was going to wrap his arm around her, but instead felt him working on getting his pants off. What are you doing? She squeaked, face flushing bright red. She might have asked him to stay the night with her, but she hadn't meant it as an invitation to have with her. His deep chuckle sent reverberations through her body. Don't worry, I just can't sleep in these pants. They look badass and they're pretty comfortable when I'm standing up, but it sucks trying to sleep in them. He explained. Okay. Tsunami replied nervously. When the pants were finally off, a large arm full of hard muscle came around and drew her tightly against his chest. He was so much bigger than her that it felt like nothing in the world could reach her as long as he was holding her, and he was radiating a comforting heat like a furnace. She was ready to fall asleep almost instantly when she felt something growing rapidly larger and pressing against her posterior. She was once again regained her bright blush at the feel of his arousal. Shifting nervously, she spoke up. Naruto. I know. I'm holding a beautiful woman, so it can't be helped. Consider it a compliment. Naruto said and squeezed her a bit harder. He had intended the squeeze as a comforting gesture, which it was, but it also pressed his hardening member into her even further. All right, Tsunami replied with her blush still firmly in place, but still shifted nervously. If you keep fidgeting like that, you're just going to encourage it. Naruto told her evenly, even though his resolve not to start anything right now was being sorely tested. That made her freeze, but her face was still on fire at what she'd been doing. The steady throb that she could feel against her even through both of their underwear was not helping matters. Pressed this closely, she could feel that he was big, very big. Despite her embarrassment, her exhaustion finally caught up to her and she fell asleep again. Tsunami woke up feeling incredibly comfortable. She was warm and the beating of a powerful heart resonated in her ears, trying to lull her back to sleep despite the fact that she was ready to wake up. If not for the fingers that began running gently through her hair, she would have fallen back asleep. As it was, she still didn't want to open her eyes and return to reality. She hadn't felt this good in a long time and she wanted to draw it out as much as possible. She was well aware that the whole thing was rather inappropriate, sleeping in the same bed with a man that she met only the day before, but she couldn't bring herself to care. It had been so long since anything good had happened in her life that she wasn't going to let something as petty as propriety stop her. She was grateful that the blonde she was using as a pillow didn't try to move or interrupt her self-indulgence. They had moved sometime during the night and Naruto was now on his back with Tsunami resting her head on his chest. She was lightly running her hand over his chest, marveling at how hardened his muscles were. She could practically feel the restrained power they contained, that combined with the fingers gently threading themselves through her hair wove a feeling of safety that she hadn't felt since before Gato had set his sights on Wave, before that even. Unlike Inari, who had no true concept of the differences between a ninja and a common thug, she knew that they were completely safe from anything Gato could throw at them now that his hired missing nin was out of commission. She had never seen a shinobi before, but even a civilian like her could see that there was something that set them apart from regular people. She had loved Kaiza, but he had been a fisherman, not a trained warrior. Though his convictions had been firm and he had been strong for a civilian, laying on the blonde shinobi's chest, she could appreciate the difference between them. She knew that thugs and bandits, no matter how many, would never be able to touch this man, and if they tried, they would easily fall to his muscle and skill. His dangerous appearance had frightened her at first, but now it was reassuring. With a regretful sigh, she decided that she really should be getting up. Good morning, she said as she looked the blonde in the eye. Morning. Decided to get up. He teased with a grin, making her flush slightly. She couldn't keep her heartbeat from speeding up at how predatory he looked. I'd prefer not to, but I've got to make breakfast. She was always the first to wake up and make breakfast. And I imagine that Tazuna might be upset that one of the shinobi he'd hired to protect him slept with his daughter on the day that he met her. Naruto mused idly. She scowled at him, but her blush made it hard to take her irritation seriously. You're making it sound worse than it actually is. True, even though the way you were wiggling against me made it really hard to resist making any moves on you. He teased with an amused grin and lightly groped her. Tsunami was looking so mortified that it was hard not to burst into laughter. Come on, let's get up before someone walks in on us. Naruto continued. After that they both got dressed and made their way downstairs, Tsunami still sporting a faint blush at his teasing. Despite her embarrassment, however, she was in a good mood. It had felt good to tell someone about what had happened and be held while she cried. The playful teasing was embarrassing, but she couldn't deny that she liked it. Some time later, breakfast was just about finished, just as the others began to make their way down. Inari once again took his food and left the table, glaring at the shinobi but without saying a word, making Tsunami sigh in disappointment. I'm going to need to go to town today and buy some more food. Tsunami spoke up when they were done eating. Could one of you go with her? Tazuna directed his question towards the shinobi. He wasn't feeling comfortable with the idea of his daughter going to buy groceries alone, especially with Gato after his head. Kakashi's single eye took a considering look as he thought it over. Someone would definitely need to go with Tsunami, but whoever would go, was going to be missing on the training today. What were you planning to train us in, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked before the Junin could say anything. Oh, I was planning to teach you how to climb trees. Kakashi answered with his usual eye smile, making everyone except Naruto look at him like he was mad, as they wondered how exactly that was going to be useful at fighting Zabuza. Well, in that case, I'll go with Tsunami, since I already know how to do that. Naruto replied with a sigh. The woman in question was happy to hear this, as she had been considering if she should ask the blonde to accompany her either way. Without your hands, Kakashi pressed further, making everyone look at him like he was even crazier. Yes, without my hands. Naruto rolled his eyes. I know how to walk on water without my hands too, in case you wanted to know. He continued in a deadpan voice. What are you guys talking about? Sakura burst out, losing her patience at the conversation that wasn't making any sense to her. He's going to be teaching you how to walk up vertical surfaces by using your chakra. Naruto explained to her. Why do you already know how to do that? Sasuke asked with a scowl. He most certainly did not like the fact that the blonde was apparently ahead of him in this as well. 2 words Sasuke. Genin. Library. Naruto deadpanned at him. Sasuke scowled some more. He really needed to get into that library as soon as they got back to Konoha. Kakashi, I want you to show me those elemental manipulation exercises once Tsunami and I come back from town. Naruto told the Junin sensei. You do know that those exercises will take much longer than a week to master. And even if you do master them, you won't be able to use them for anything much without knowing any wind or water techniques. Kakashi protested. Well, if you know anything else that I could train in that would actually be useful in 1 week, then I'm all ears. Naruto retorted. Well, I guess you've got a point there. Kakashi gave in with a sigh. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Thank you for coming with me. Tsunami said towards the blonde walking next to her as they entered the town. Naruto had opted to bring his newly acquired giant sword with him, strapped to his back with an improvised harness. It's no problem, I could hardly let a pretty woman like you go into a dangerous place like this alone now, could I? He answered with a lazy grin towards her, making her blush again at his slight flirting. He'd noticed that she seemed to be in a better mood than she had been yesterday and was being deliberately playful with her to keep up her spirits. He had never liked seeing women sad. Naruto was observing the state of the town as they moved through it and noted that it was in a sad state indeed. There were people just sitting in the streets, looking absolutely hopeless and clearly too hungry to even stay standing for very long. He was drawing some fearful looks due to his style of dress and the sword, but the fact that he was walking peacefully next to Tsunami seemed to calm them down. Most people never even glanced at the Konoha forehead protector strapped to his thigh. As they made their way to a store that sold food, he could see clearly that the only food it had available was of poor quality and sold at obviously inflated prices. His respect for Tsunami's cooking went up a few notches. He had no idea how she had managed to make food that still tasted good with such poor quality materials. This actually reminds me of my own childhood. Naruto commented a bit sadly as Tsunami picked out the best of the vegetables that were available. Tsunami looked at him in surprise and confusion. What do you mean? Isn't Konoha a prosperous village? Oh, it is. The problem is that I'm not too well liked by a lot of the villagers, so they often sold me nearly spoiled food at triple price. Naruto explained. But why? She exclaimed in shock. It was due to certain events that took place during my birth. The villagers blamed me for it even though I was a baby at the time. But that's insane. How could they blame you if you were just a baby at the time? Tsunami asked in distress for him. Because people are stupid. Naruto answered simply. They had bought everything that Tsunami had picked out by now and were making their way down the street. But surely not everyone was like that? Tsunami asked hopefully. No, not everyone. An old ramen stand owner and his young daughter were very kind to me, and some other people that bothered to talk to me at least treated me like anyone else. In my experience, a person can be very intelligent and brave, but people as a group are often barely any better than animals, worse sometimes, since animals at least aren't likely to do much harm. He made no mention of Xana despite the fact that she was honestly the only reason he hadn't become suicidal at a record young age. That was information that was simply not revealed lightly. What do you mean? Tsunami asked, wanting an explanation for that rather cynical statement. Take the situation in Wave right now for example. Naruto began. Your husband saw that Gato was bad news and fought against him, but he failed because nobody else was willing to stick their neck out alongside him. If everyone had risen against him, then he would never have gotten a stranglehold on the country, but everyone was telling themselves that they've got too much to lose if they take that risk, never even considering what might happen if Gato was allowed to take over. Now they're sitting hopelessly in the street, but they're still unwilling to stick their neck out and help Tazuna even if they have nothing more to lose. The people in Konoha did something similar with me. Everyone just condemned me because that's what everyone else was doing. Most of them never even gave a single thought towards the why, instead blindly believing what they heard somewhere. Tsunami was deeply shaken by his words, not just because she was reminded of the loss of her husband, but also at the dark but undeniable truth of what he said. The people of Wave had looked up to Kaiza as a hero, but had been unwilling to stand with him, and now they were paying the terrible price of their cowardice. They had lapsed into silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts until Naruto felt a small tug on his coat. Looking down, he saw a small and dirty girl who couldn't be more than 6 years old holding onto his coat. She looked terrified that he would be angry at her, but the growling of her stomach, which he could hear clearly, had made her desperate enough to approach. She had apparently seen that he was looking much healthier than anyone else here and was hoping that he would give her something. Do you have any food, mister? She asked timidly while cupping her hands in front of her hopefully. Looking at the small girl, Naruto was reminded of himself at that age. Giving her a smile, but making sure not to show her his teeth, Naruto reached into his coat towards one of the seals, inscribed into the inside of it, and unsealed a few ration bars that he kept in there. The things tasted as bland as cardboard, but there was a lot of calories packed into them. When he deposited the ration bars into her hands, the small girl gave a bright smile and thanked him before running off. That was a very kind thing you did, Tsunami said approvingly. Before he could say anything back, there was a sudden commotion from the direction that the girl had run off to, and when Naruto turned to look, his face darkened with anger. Watch where you're going, you filthy little brat. An unwashed-looking and more than slightly tipsy thug yelled at the very girl that Naruto had just given the ration bars to, his hand already raised to strike her. Tsunami quickly ran after him as the blonde made his way towards the thug, catching his hand before he could hit the girl. Ignoring the angry-looking man trying to get his hand free, Naruto addressed the little girl. Run along, sweetie. When the wide-eyed girl picked up her dropped ration bars and scampered off, the smile that Naruto had given her dropped off his face and he shoved the man into a nearby alley, with Tsunami following behind nervously. To Naruto, this was a perfect opportunity. He'd been intending to get some more information on Gato, and this piece of scum had very conveniently volunteered for an interrogation, assuming of course that he worked for Gato. As soon as the man got back on his feet, he rushed at Naruto, intending to punch him, but found his fist caught in an unbreakable grip. He tried to free his fist, but Naruto just tightened his grip painfully and twisted his wrist, forcing the man to his knees. "We're gonna kill you for this, you bastard. I work for Gato and you've been warned that anyone who goes against us is gonna be killed." The man spat angrily. Naruto looked at him coldly and bared his sharp teeth in a menacing smile. The idiot had just spared him the trouble of finding out whether he worked for Gato or not. "Tell me what Gato is planning to do about the bridge builder," he demanded. The man raged, trying to get his hand free. Naruto kept tightening his grip until the bones in his fist were crushed, causing the man to scream. Predictably, nobody came to check what was going on, being too scared to get caught up in anything dangerous. "You've got plenty of bones left. I'm going to keep breaking them until you answer me," Naruto stated coldly and without the slightest shred of sympathy. The man's nerve broke and he started talking. He's just going to wait for that ninja he's hired to get better and let him take care of it. "Is there anything else?" The man hesitated and the blonde grabbed his other arm and began squeezing. Okay. He also told us all to gather at a spot several hundred yards away from the bridge a week from now, but I don't know what for." The man quickly started talking before any more of his bones ended up broken. "Well, that doesn't sound suspicious at all," Naruto thought to himself sarcastically. Gato sounded exactly like several other greedy pieces of slime that he'd had to deal with in the past when he'd still been taking over the criminal underground in Konoha, except for the fact that he was more successful. And the one thing that you could count on with the likes of them was that their own greed always got the better of them. "I've told you everything, now let me go," the man said, cradling his broken hand. Naruto ignored him and instead grabbed hold of his head with both hands and twisted violently, ending his life with a sickening crack. Letting the fresh corpse fall to the ground, he produced a sealing scroll from inside his coat and sealed the body inside. No need to be causing Gato to get suspicious and changing his plans if one of his flunkies was found with his neck broken. Turning back towards the entrance of the alley, he saw a pale and shaken Tsunami staring at him with wide eyes and trembling hands. "Shit. Sorry you had to see that, Tsunami," he said quietly. Tsunami for her part was having trouble reconciling the image she had of the blonde as a gentle and caring man with the cold and brutal execution she had just witnessed. She knew of course that killing was a part of life as a shinobi, but seeing it was something else entirely. She didn't feel at all sorry for the man he'd killed, it was just the act itself that shocked her with its casual brutality. "It's all right," she said shakily. They made their way back to the house in silence, giving Tsunami plenty of time to calm down. "Does it bother you to kill like that?" she asked softly. "Not anymore. It bothered me when I made my first kill when I was 12, but I've long since realized that some people just need to die, just like Gato is going to die by the end of this no matter what," Naruto admitted, and she was struck by the absolute confidence with which he said that, as if any other outcome was simply impossible. They had nearly reached the house before Tsunami spoke again. She was biting her lips nervously and blushing in embarrassment but forced enough calm into her voice to speak clearly. Will you come to my room again tonight?" Naruto looked at her in surprise at the request, before his expression turned into a teasing grin again. "Well, if the client wants to have her way with me, then as a shinobi under your employ, I cannot refuse." That her father was the actual client was a minor detail that Naruto decided to ignore in favor of his teasing. She slapped his arm, blushing furiously. Shut up. It's not like that." Once she had calmed down somewhat, she asked another question. "Is that really true? That you can't refuse something like that?" She was thinking about Kunoichi and if they were forced to sleep with clients if they demanded it, as she imagined that many clients would be like that. "No, not really. Clients are warned that demands like that are not tolerated. At least, that's how it is in Konoha. I don't know how it is in other hidden villages." he admitted. His D rank were another matter, as members of the village were well aware of that rule. They had just ignored it in his case because they knew that they wouldn't get in trouble for it. By this time they had reached the house and Tsunami went inside to put away all the groceries, while Naruto made a beeline for the forest where the rest of Team 7 was training. When he arrived there he could see Kakashi lazing around, reading his porn as usual, Sakura leaning against a tree in exhaustion and Sasuke glaring at a tree venomously. "How's the training going? I figured it out on the first try," Sakura said proudly, before sending a nervous glance towards Sasuke when she saw his scowl deepen. "Oh, and how long were you able to stay on the tree?" Naruto questioned. "Well, about 15 minutes. She admitted with a blush. "So basically, you have such a tiny amount of chakra that controlling it was easy, but a simple chakra control exercise like that exhausts you in 15 minutes?" he asked dryly. "Yes," Sakura said with her head hanging despondently. "Well, this should help you build up your chakra capacity if you keep at it, and you can help the princess over there figure out that he's using too much chakra," Naruto advised. Sakura frowned at him for calling Sasuke a princess, but thought better of saying anything. "How do you know I'm using too much chakra?" Sasuke asked irritably, having heard the entire conversation and was none too pleased with being called princess. "I can see you blasting the bark off the tree's genius. Don't feel too bad about it though. The first time I tried this I used so much chakra that I nearly blew the tree in half," the blonde admitted with a wry grin. Sasuke scowled even further at the blonde. Naruto's obvious greater strength was annoying him to no end, and the worst part of it was that he didn't even know if he'd seen all of it yet. He really wanted to ask about those chains that the blonde had created, but Kakashi had already forbidden him and Sakura from doing so or even talking about it. He could understand why even if he didn't like it. When the blonde had called out the technique, he had called it a secret art, so not only was it pointless to ask, it was also prying into the business of another clan. Naruto made his way over to Kakashi, intending to get those elemental training exercises out of him. "Alright sensei, tell me how to train up my affinities," Naruto said as he came up to Kakashi. Closing his book, but keeping his thumb inside it to mark his place, the Junin turned towards his blonde student. "Well, for wind you need to learn how to cut a leaf with only your chakra, and for water you need to take some regular paper and soak it with only your chakra. Learning how to do this will give you a better handle on transforming your chakra nature." "I see, so I've been going about the whole thing backwards," Naruto muttered to himself as he created 10 clones and had them cut leaves. He'd have to wait for water training until he got home, since he had no paper. "So you've figured out the secret of the shadow clone technique as well?" Kakashi asked in surprise at seeing the blonde foist off the training on his clones. "Oh yeah, it's the only reason I managed to learn Fuinjutsu without killing myself. That shit is dangerous," Naruto answered. Kakashi's sweat dropped at the blonde's reply. If Naruto was using shadow clones to learn Fuinjutsu and the typical Uzumaki instinct for the art bred true, he could only hope that the blonde wouldn't start making reality-bending seals until he was a Chunin and Kakashi was no longer partly responsible for his actions. "One other thing sensei," Naruto said, making Kakashi look towards him again. "I interrogated one of Gato's men while I was in town with Tsunami. Apparently he's ordered all of his goons to gather somewhere close to the bridge a week from now, which I found suspicious considering that that's about the time we expect Zabuza to recover from his death trance." Kakashi considered the information carefully for a minute before replying. "That is suspicious, we'll have to be careful about that. I'm going to be sending disguised clones into town every day to see if I can pick up any more details over the next few days," Naruto informed his sensei. Kakashi nodded in approval before his mind went off to a different subject that he'd been wondering about since the previous night. "Say Naruto," Kakashi began. Naruto had just been about to move off and start practicing with his new sword when the tone of his sensei's voice stopped him. "Yeah, if you've known who your parents were for years now, why didn't you reveal it?" It had been bugging him ever since their talk last and he couldn't figure out the reason that Naruto had kept quiet about it. Because I can just imagine that a number of people that hate me for the Kyuubi right now, would suddenly be trying to kiss my if they knew I was the son of their precious Yondaime, and I think the hypocrisy of it might have made me break someone's face sooner rather than later. Ah, I see. So Naruto is that kind of man, Kakashi concluded. The kind of man that disdained anything and everything that he hadn't gained through his own sweat. The fame of his parents, no matter how much respect it would give him, was not his own, so it held no appeal for Naruto. It was an attitude that Kakashi couldn't help but respect, even though he wondered just what had happened to Naruto that he valued only his own strength. That kind of attitude wasn't born from nothing after all. With nothing further to say, Naruto moved off to get a handle of swinging around his new sword, and Kakashi went back to his porn. Tsunami was anxiously waiting in her futon for Naruto to show up. She'd been terribly embarrassed about asking him to do this, but it had been the most wonderful thing that she had experienced in a long time, and she was willing to suffer through a little embarrassment if she could have that again. His sudden appearance next to her made her jump in instinctive fright, the fact that she had been expecting him being the only reason that she hadn't screamed. He was already in his underwear, coat and pants nowhere in sight. "You're finally here," she said with a relieved sigh as he climbed under the sheets and spooned her exactly the same way that he'd done the previous night. "Sorry about that. I had to take a swim in the river. Swinging that sword around made me smell a bit too manly," Naruto explained, making her snort in amusement. As soon as they'd settled, Tsunami started fidgeting again, and Naruto couldn't help but notice that she wasn't wearing the same thing as she had yesterday. Her night shirt today was a lot shorter, only just barely reaching his thighs, and she'd apparently decided to wear a purple thong instead of a more substantial piece of underwear. He was already developing the inevitable hard-on and was about to warn her about what her fidgeting was doing to him when she surprised him by turning around and pressing her against his chest. He raised a questioning eyebrow at her that was only barely visible in the low light, but she just kept biting her lip nervously while looking at him and rubbing her thighs together. "What it is?" he asked, just to prod her out of her thoughts. It was getting pretty obvious to him what was on her mind. Instead of answering, she leaned, brought her head close, and kissed him. Despite his intention of getting rid of the smell by taking a swim in the river, she could still smell the remnants of the sweat that had clung to him, and it had been the last straw. She'd been attracted to him ever since she had seen him, and the more time she spent around him, the more things she found to like. Far from being unpleasant, the musky smell excited her to no end, and she couldn't take it anymore. She didn't care that he would have to leave when the mission was over and she'd probably never see him again. She didn't care that she had only known him for 2 days. The only thing she cared about was the burning need to feel him sheathed inside her. "Are you sure about this?" Naruto asked her, just to be sure. "Yes, now take me," she urged, getting desperate to get what she wanted. Not needing any more convincing, he returned her kiss and rolled over so that he was on top of her. It was something of a surreal experience for Tsunami to have to be careful so that she didn't cut her tongue on his teeth, so she let him win their little tongue duel without putting up much of a fight. When he moved his mouth down to her neck, she couldn't help letting out an excited shudder at the feel of those teeth scraping lightly over her neck, knowing that they were easily sharp enough to pierce through her skin. She suddenly felt herself lifted up, and her night shirt went flying over her head, leaving her completely except for her thong. She covered her with her hands self-consciously when she saw his eyes roving over her the way a hungry lion might look at a gazelle. Without saying a word, he grabbed her hands and raised them over her head and lowered his mouth to her right nipple. The movement of a hot tongue over the sensitive nub of flesh made her take a sharp intake of breath that grew into excited panting when she felt the gentlest of scrape of inhumanly sharp teeth against it. The fact that she tried to free her arms from his grip but felt as if she was trying to move a mountain only aroused her further. He paid equal attention to both of her and left her aching with need by the time he moved on. Her panties were already a soaked mess when he hooked his fingers into the waistband and took them off, with Tsunami eagerly lifting her hips to help him. The deep whiff he took of her crotch embarrassed her, but she didn't protest when he started moving his face closer. He had released her hands by this time and she was desperately grasping at the futon, wanting him to get on with it already. She kept her teeth clenched tightly to prevent any loud moans from escaping her as he started licking up what she'd released so far, avoiding any highly sensitive areas. She continued to grit her teeth together when his tongue began to probe her nether lips and slip inside of her, only moaning deep in her throat to prevent herself from being heard by the entire house. When he moved his attention to her swollen, she quickly raised her hand and sank her teeth into her own forearm to hold in the moaned screams, the other hand finding its way to the top of his head and pressing it harder against her crotch. It didn't take even a minute before she was shuddering with the after effects of her orgasm. Panting, breathless and almost ready to pass out, she couldn't believe that he'd gotten her this worked up already and they were technically still at the foreplay stage. Due to her lack of attention, she never even noticed him before his weight was suddenly pressing down on her again and she felt the monster between his legs pressed against her quivering nether lips. She'd known he was big when she felt him through his underwear the previous night, but now that he'd removed it, she realized just how big it was. She was intending to tell him to be careful, because there was no way that all of that was going to fit inside her when he pressed his lips against hers again, making her taste herself on his tongue while he rubbed his rod against her, getting it lubricated so that it would slip inside her without trouble. He took hold of her hands again, having noticed earlier that she liked it, as he lined himself up with her entrance and pressed inside with the head, making her moan into his mouth. The deep, satisfied growls coming from his throat as he penetrated her slowly excited her with the thought that he was going to slam himself fully inside of her any second now. As he penetrated deeper and deeper inside her, stretching her insides to the point of being painful, she was distantly grateful that he hadn't done that, as it would have no doubt hurt her badly. There was no restraining her moans and screams as he kept going deeper every time she thought that there couldn't possibly be any more room inside her, moans and screams which were fortunately muffled by his mouth. He stayed buried inside of her fully for a short while as she gasped for breath and squeezed her hips around him, letting her adjust to his size before he moved again. He returned to plundering her mouth when he began to move, causing her to return to moaning into his mouth. When he began to speed up and growl in a way that told her that he was getting close, she tried to let him know that she didn't want him to release inside her and possibly get her pregnant. The way that he was holding her down and covering her mouth prevented that, however, and the frantic bucking of her hips served only to push him deeper inside her. Despite that though, she still felt her own orgasm approaching again and she was helpless to do anything except let him do as he pleased while she climaxed and felt him filling her up with his seed, prolonging the pleasure she felt as her fleshy inner walls tried to wring every last drop out of him. "You shouldn't have done that, I don't want another baby," she panted out when the uncontrollable shuddering from her orgasm subsided, her face and hair sweaty. "And you won't have one. I've placed a seal on myself that prevents me from getting any woman pregnant," Naruto assured her, his voice much more composed than hers. He was expertly hiding just how stupid he felt for not telling her about that before he'd nearly caused her to freak out by making her think that he was trying to impregnate her. "A seal?" Tsunami asked in confusion, having no idea what that was. "It's a ninja thing that I use to make sure I'm incapable of having children until I turn it off. Don't worry about it," he dismissed airily. "Oh, well, that's good," she said in relief. "We should get some sleep." "Oh, you think we're done?" He smirked at her in a predatory manner when she looked at him in shock. "Shinobi do not tire that easily." Tsunami felt him hardening inside her again as he said that, and she couldn't believe that he was ready to go again so soon. She was already tired and felt as if she could fall asleep any moment now, but was denied as he began thrusting inside her again. He brought her to another orgasm and released inside of her twice more before he was finished, leaving her barely able to stay conscious. She noted with some incredulity that her stomach had actually bulged slightly from the amount of sperm he'd pumped into her and she was painfully full. She'd thought that stuff like that only happened in that Ika Ika book she'd read once when she'd been bored. Despite how much she just wanted to pass out and sleep for the next 2 days, however, there was something that really needed to be done if she didn't want her futon to be soiled beyond all hope of recovery. I need to go to the bathroom. Tsunami murmured into his ear sleepily. All right, Naruto answered. I'm afraid you'll need to carry me. She muttered at him with a good deal of embarrassment. I can't move my legs properly. She was grateful to every deity that had ever existed that at least the bathroom was just across the hall from her room. What followed was infinitely embarrassing for the single mother, as Naruto had to maneuver her onto the toilet and then proceeded to stare shamelessly, as she sat on the toilet with her legs spread and a small river of sperm leaked out of her. Don't look, it's embarrassing. She pleaded with him. Neither her first husband nor Kaiser had been this blatantly unashamed of all things related, and she had no idea how to deal with it. I think we're a bit past being embarrassed with each other, don't you? He chuckled at her, amused by her flaming red face. At least the shower they took together was less embarrassing, despite her uncooperative legs. Once they were both cleaned up and back in her futon, still since they hadn't bothered to get dressed, Tsunami looked over at the blonde that whose presence she intended to enjoy for as long as his mission in Wave lasted. I really wish I could keep you after your mission is over. She murmured longingly. Aside from how attractive he was also just so likable that it would be absurdly easy to fall in love with him. Era, are you trying to sink your claws into a younger man, Tsunami? Naruto said in a faux scandalized tone. I'm not that old, Naruto. I'm only 29, you know. Tsunami scowled at him, but the poorly suppressed laughter in her voice betrayed the fact that she was just playing along. Ah, but I am that young. Didn't Tazuna tell you that I'm only 17? He said with relish, realizing that she must have made the same mistake as her father and assumed he was somewhere in his mid-20s. The look of shock on her face was priceless, and he intended to treasure it for a long time. No, as a matter of fact, he didn't tell me. She muttered sourly. I can't believe I've bedded a 17-year-old. When did I become a cougar? She said mostly to herself with wry amusement. It didn't really matter how old he was in the end, but she had honestly thought that he couldn't be more than 5 or 6 years younger than her. Why? When you met me, of course. I could see you checking me over like a prime piece of meat right away. His grin was so wide by now that she could swear that she saw the moonlight pinging off those fangs of his. Oh, just shut up and go to sleep. She scowled at him for embarrassing her again and nuzzled into his chest. Naruto did as he was told and shut up, but he did not fall asleep yet. He didn't fall asleep because he was troubled. He had started to like Tsunami. In fact, he had started to like her a great deal. He had never expected such a thing to happen and didn't know what to do about it. Either way, he wasn't going to be doing anything about it at this exact moment, so he decided not to worry about it. He wasn't really stupid enough to think that the problem would leave his mind if he left the comfortable spot with the warm woman cuddling into him, so he didn't bother freaking out. He could think this problem over when he was less sleepy. XXXXXXXXXXX. Breakfast the next morning was an interesting affair to say the least. Inari had decided to actually eat with the rest of them for a change, but was scowling as darkly as an 8-year-old possibly could, seeming to be especially irritated that his mother appeared to be happier because of the presence of the shinobi in their home. It seems that the gloomy brat resented the fact that they believed themselves capable of doing something and that his mother was buying into it. Naruto wondered whether he would have preferred to know the real reason why his mother was in such a good mood. Tsunami was walking with a slight limp, claiming that she had slipped and bumped her hip against the doorframe while she had been making breakfast. Everyone seemed to believe her, except Kakashi, who had glanced at Naruto and caught his quickly concealed smirk. After that, the scarecrow Junin had quickly stuck his nose into his orange book to conceal the proud tears gathering in his eye. MILF Hunter. There was a time and place for that kind of information to be used in order to traumatize his other 2 students some more, and the dining table during breakfast with the family of the lucky woman who had scored herself a young blonde was definitely not it. After they had eaten, everyone had gone off to do their own thing. Sasuke and Sakura, along with Kakashi had gone to the forest to continue training tree walking, one to learn it and the other to bolster her chakra capacity. Naruto and Tazuna had gone to the bridge, though not before the blonde had made several dozen clones and had them scatter across to accomplish various tasks, such as training and spying around town. Both Sasuke and Sakura had wondered what the point of sending clones to train was and were shocked at hearing that shadow clones could be used as a training aid due to the memory transfer function. The Uchiha survivor had seethed with jealousy at learning that his blonde teammate had such a powerful tool at his disposal and demanded to learn it, forgetting that it was a kinjutsu. Kakashi had shot down his idea with a reminder that only people with a truly insane chakra capacity could utilize the technique as a training aid. The day passed without any further incidents. Naruto's transformed clones that had been skulking around town, eavesdropping on anything of interest, had not found anything new, but had caught a few conversations with the thugs wondering why they were supposed to show up near the bridge, so at least that was confirmed. The clones he had sent to train had been making slow but steady progress, though one of them had for some reason decided to go fishing instead of training, which had made Tsunami smile when it had brought the fish, so he figured it was all good. Sasuke had just about mastered the tree climbing, his desire to catch up to Naruto making him desperate enough to ask Sakura for help. Sakura herself had been ecstatic about it, along with being able to stay vertical on a tree for half an hour at a time, making her claim that this was the best mission ever, momentarily forgetting the threat of messy death looming over her head. They would both be moving on to water walking soon. It was during the evening meal that Inari's gloom finally reached critical mass and exploded, unable to stand the fact that people were able to enjoy themselves. Why do you guys bother to try so hard? No matter how hard you train, you're still no match for Gato's men. No matter what glorious claims you make or how hard you work, the weak will only end up getting killed. Which is why Gato is going to get killed and Wave can begin rebuilding. Naruto said with a dismissive shrug, not particularly bothered with the rant. He was living proof that hard work and training did pay off, so the ranting of an 8-year-old didn't faze him in the slightest. Shut up. What do you know about our pain? Living in your big, fancy village, happy all the time and then sticking your nose into other people's business. You don't know anything about suffering. You should just leave. Inari shouted at the blonde, further enraged by his dismissive attitude. A feeling of murderous anger suffocated the room, making everyone shut up and freeze as Naruto stared down at the boy who had just blurted out something incredibly stupid. You must really hate your mother and grandfather. He said coldly. What are you talking about? Inari stuttered, feeling both shocked and terrified at the sudden menace in the blonde's voice. We are here to protect your grandfather while he finishes his bridge. If we leave the way you want us to, then he will die and your mother will likely suffer the same or even worse soon after. Naruto continued with the same cold tone, freezing the young boy's thoughts in his tracks. Come on Naruto, that's enough. Sakura said, trying to stop things from escalating, but received a glacial glare and a growl that told her to shut up and stay out of it. You sit here, in a warm house, with a loving mother who cooks for you and takes care of you, with a brave grandfather who is risking his life to make sure you can live a better life, and you spit on their love for you. Inari looked about ready to burst into tears and run away, but found himself unable to. Unknown to everyone, Naruto was using his much-neglected chakra voice enhancement to force him to listen. You live near a town not even 20 minutes walk away, where there are children living in the street. Children who have no one to take care of them. Children younger than you, who are forced to beg for food, and you sit here with a full stomach and complain. Tsunami, who was just as frozen as everyone else, realized that he must be thinking of the little girl from yesterday. My life was harder than yours is ever likely to be, but I climbed out of that instead of whining about it. Sasuke had to see his entire family killed by the hand of his own brother, but you don't hear him whining about it, even if he is a moody bastard. The last part might have been considered somewhat funny if it hadn't been delivered in a voice cold enough to freeze water. I have no idea what happened to Kakashi-sensei, but I can guess that whatever makes him stare at a monument to the fallen for hours on end every day wasn't pleasant. In fact, the only one here who had a life better than you is Sakura. Instead of making everything worse, you should be doing your best to protect what you have, because as far this world is concerned, you're actually pretty lucky. With that, the blonde turned around and headed towards the door, grabbing his stolen sword along the way, and everyone breathed a relieved sigh that it was over without any violence. Where are you going, Naruto? Kakashi asked with some worry. Training. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto made his way towards the forest, most of his anger already cooled. The brat had gotten to him with the way he threw tantrums and ignored just how lucky he actually was. But the real reason he was still walking into the forest instead of going back was because he needed some space to figure out what the hell was going on with him and Tsunami and what he was going to do about it. All the women that he had slept with previously had been either prostitutes or the type who was just looking for quick fling with no strings attached, excepting the obvious case of Xana, who was another